4, 3.
Welcome to Jex's Jump Joint number 2. This one is a breakdown of Star Citizen's new Onyx facilities. I'm going to be talking about the good, the bad, what's working, what's not working, and what I think this means for Star Citizen in the stage of its development. In the background, I have some footage here of me running through the Onyx facility, so I'm just going to let that play in the background as I kind of break these down and go into more detail on these. Let's start off with defining, like, what do we mean when we're talking about these Onyx facilities, in case you haven't been paying too close of attention to it. These are new content in 4.3. They're basically Star Citizen's first dungeons. So they have missions that lead to them and have a little bit of narrative. There's a little bit of puzzles that go with the missions. There's about 120 of these, as far as I know. They're in Stanton on all of the moons. There's 10 on each moon, or at least something close to that. It is important to note that these were released not fully idealized or fully finished. There are parts that are still missing. There is supposedly a whole third wing of these that are missing. Right now we have a engineering wing and we have a research wing. There's also cooperative zones, which are meant to be like contested zones, but more for playing in a group and accomplishing things together, puzzles that maybe require two people doing things at the same time, versus, the contested zones where it's just every man for themselves, or, groups against groups. So that's missing. I'm not 100% clear if that's supposed to be part of this third wing or if it's incorporated in all the wings. There's also been rumors of maybe like there's a boss fight somewhere that's missing, or maybe that's coming at a later location and a later release as part of the same narrative. These do pick up on the narrative that has been going on in Star Citizen all year. I think it's actually the B story mission about the regen crisis. So this is continuing where the Lazarus chain of missions or sandbox activities left off, continuing to explore the experiments of Dr. Yoritz and what he's up to. And yeah, so if you're into the narrative and following the narrative, there's a lot there to, further the narrative in these Onyx facilities. Now, I'm going to dive in this video and talk about the things I think are good, the things I think are not good, and then sort of an overview of what this means for Star Citizen uniquely right now in its development cycle. These are, of course, just my opinions. You might have different opinions. You might have different experiences with the facilities. That's all fine. That's okay. We're allowed to have different opinions. Your mileage might vary. And, I think what's important is that we're able to listen to each other's opinions and that we don't, try to assign each other into polarized groups. I talk about this a lot. Just because I disagree with some things doesn't mean I'm not a fan or a supporter. It doesn't mean I think it's all a scam. And conversely, I realize if somebody, enjoys this, that doesn't mean, and I'm not saying I don't enjoy it, I do enjoy it, but if someone is a big champion of the facilities and don't have any complaints about it, that doesn't necessarily mean they're, in the white knight camp and just excuse anything and everything CIG related. Okay, so most of us probably occupy the middle ground, and there's room there for variance and discussion and debate and different opinions. So with that said, let's jump in and talk about what's good about the Onyx facilities in 4.3. As you're watching this, I think the thing that probably jumps out at you is just the atmosphere. And I would say the atmosphere, the design, the level design overall of these facilities is really good. Probably the best we've seen in Star Citizen so far. I think they're a step up from the contested zones. They do feel similar to the contested zones, but there's more going on and just some really cool, unique areas and bespoke effects and things like that I think raise it up a notch. So really well done to CIG and their level designers, their game designers, their art teams, their environment teams. Like, really good job on these new facilities. And as far as I know, this was like new content. It wasn't like with Lazarus, where they took some stuff from, Theaters of War and just kind of changed it a bit and updated it a bit and made it work for that, which was fine. It was good they used the content. But I think what's impressive here is if they did develop something from scratch, they did it pretty quickly and it's really well done. So definitely kudos to the team there. I also really like the mission giver for this one. Arkin Maller, I think is his name. He does a great job of sort of leading you through these missions, and I thought they just did a good job with his performance and his animation and design and all that. So again, really good job with that. I think it's one of the better mission givers that we've had in Star Citizen, and yeah, maybe we'll see where that goes. And if we see Arkin come back for more in the future, that would be great. Now, another thing I'll touch on, and this is going to kind of be in my good and bad columns, but the narrative building. I think using these first 2 points I mentioned, Arkin Maller, the mission giver, and the atmosphere and level design, there is some really good things they're doing with extending the narrative that we've been seeing in the, mostly in the Lazarus sandbox activities, but also they've done a good job of just like putting narrative in the game in just ambient ways. Like when you go into a medical clinic, you hear, patients there that are upset about the, the regens not working. And I've loved seeing these like story just kind of woven in different places, and none of it's in your face. It's not like there's a cut scene that blocks the gameplay and it sits you down and just like feed you this narrative. Like you have to be paying attention to get it. But I think they've done a really good job with extending this narrative out, making it interesting, and just dripping pieces of it along the way and letting us engage it sort of at our own pace, right? So that side of the narrative for 4.3, I'm really happy with, and I think they did a great job. I've got 2 more things in the good column. So I'm not trying to sandbag this, or I'm not trying to just give like a few token examples, okay? Because I've got 5 good, I've got 5 bad, so I'm trying to be fairly balanced here. Number 4 on the good column, I like the rewards. I know they're not going to be for everyone, but I don't think every event should have rewards. They're just great for everybody, and everybody wants them. I think the game, at its best, will have different activities with different rewards, and players will sort of pick and choose what they want to do, what they like, and what they want to pursue, what they want to go after. So for these events for this event and these missions, we're getting the Geist armor. It's the new stealth armor. I don't think it's fully realized yet. Like, we don't really have stealth gameplay. We don't have FPS scanning, so we don't have the counter to that. I think we're all anticipating that these Geist suits will be more important once FPS scanning is a thing, if we want to reduce our signature, especially in PvP. So, I think from that standpoint, they're a pretty decent reward. And I think they look okay. I think the versions, like the ASD version with the hood and the fabric integrated, look a lot better than the standard versions without. And that does require you to kind of grind through and get it. So, it makes sense to me that sort of nicer armor is a step up. And my 5th point of things that I think were done well with these Onyx facilities is the player distribution system. Now, it's a little bit hokey the way it's implemented. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But I think the idea of spreading players out intentionally, especially for this type of event, it gives us something to contrast all the other events we've had, where we were basically funneling people to a handful of locations and really encouraging, like, let's get there and fight it out and duke it out and see who gets away with the goods. This one, they had a different philosophy of, let's try to spread people out. They might still find each other. You can try to, find PvP, but you have to be a little more thoughtful about it, a little more patient. I've seen people, like laying some traps and waiting, and, you can certainly do it that way. So it's good. It's good to have both, right? It's good to have areas where they're more contested, it's more PvP, and it's good to have other areas where the focus isn't PvP, but there's still a chance of it. So you still have to be on guard, but you can also go in and grind this out, and be a little bit safer. So I thought having this system where when it's working, it's supposed to, if I take a mission and it sends me to this one location, then the next player that comes and gets the mission, it's going to send them somewhere else. It's trying to keep us spread out. So really good to see that level of design coming into the game and that thought, and giving a little bit of, you know, different experiences for people who want to play and experience the game. But maybe, you know, not everybody wants PvP contested zones. So I think having a balance of opportunity for players is good. You know, different play styles, different opportunities, like I said, with the rewards, different things you can choose to go and do in the game. It's where we need to get. It's what's healthy for the game at the end of the day. All right, let's shift gears and talk about the bad. Again, I've got 5 points on the bad, pretty balanced. I didn't actually do that intentionally. It just happened to work out. Okay, the first thing I will mention, and this is going to be, you know, a little bit controversial depending on where you sit on this and what your experience is with MMOs, but one is the grind. These facilities are very grindy if you want to grind for that rare ASD branded version of the Geist armor that I was talking about. Now, grinding is a part of MMOs, so like I said, maybe you're okay with that, maybe you're not. But a lot of MMOs, even if they have a grind, the problem with this is it's completely RNG. Every time you open one of these Geist armor boxes, there's a chance it will have the ASD branded, you know, rare drop. The problem is there's no guaranteed drops anywhere. You know, a lot of other MMOs, there's a factor of RNG, but maybe you fight a boss and there's a guaranteed, like, high quality drop, right? And that's not, we don't have that yet. So you're grinding and grinding and grinding, but there's no way to do anything that guarantees you're going to get some level of high reward in these missions. And that is maybe still okay if we had a player market. That's the other thing that's missing. It's kind of okay to have this RNG system, because if I go in and I get 10 ASD backpacks, but I don't get anything else, if I could easily go to the market and either do a trade like, hey, I've got a backpack, I'll trade a backpack for a helmet, or I could just sell the backpack and then I could buy a helmet, you know, that would make this make more sense. So my real problem here is not so much that there's a grind or that there's RNG, although we could debate those things and you can make an argument that, you know, that's not the best way to do this. I think the real problem is that doing it when we don't have a market for players to easily exchange their loot items is the problem. And not having guaranteed drops is, you know, a part of that as well, with not having the market. So maybe the issue here is not so much the grind, but just that they're implementing these kind of grind mechanics too early. And the question is, if we don't have those other things in the game right now, maybe they should change the RNG. Well, that would be my argument. Like, don't put the RNG fully in if you don't have the other systems fully in to support the RNG design. So my suggestion there would be, yeah, let's do something with the RNG, either bump those numbers up, like do something to alleviate the issue. I've been through these dozens of times and I don't have a helmet. I've got ASD, everything else. I've got some items duplicated. Helmets, there's 5 boxes. Everything else only has 3 boxes. You think statistically helmets would be one of the first thing I get, but that's how RNG works. So I've opened way more helmet boxes than anything else. I still don't have the ASD helmet. So, and that's fine. I'm going to keep grinding. But of course, the other problem with this is there's a good chance I'm going to lose this armor in the next update because it's not account bound, because there's still so many issues with the, you know, persistence of things that you find in game. I don't care about it too much because this is alpha. Everything's going to be wiped in the future anyway. But that's another problem with this RNG system right now. You know, we don't have the player market. We don't have guaranteed drops from a boss fight or something. And we might lose everything that we grind for. So those are 3 big negatives against the grind that we have right now. Again, not so much about the grind, but it's about all these other factors that complicate the grind. Let's move on. Issue number 2, freight elevator rewards. Why am I completing these missions and getting my ASD storage drive rewards, which Wicklow wants for different trades, with the freight elevator, right? And this is where I'm going to bring up my first two clips to bring Jared into this from his recent Inside Star Citizen.
Let's talk about the elevator in the room. Now, up until this point, freight elevators were mostly used in single-player, short-term environments like personal hangars. There would usually only be one user, and on the back end, it would be stowed when you left, and a fresh new freight elevator presented every single time you went back in. Now, while certainly not perfect, these tended to operate better than the ones out in the wilderness at, say, outposts, which, like many other things in the verse, tended to compound their issues over time the longer they were left to run.
Okay, so this is Jared in the recent Inside Star Citizen talking about freight elevators. And basically what he's saying here is freight elevators in your hangar good, or at least better, freight elevators and outposts problematic. What's left out here, and that didn't really come up specifically in his freight elevator discussion, was freight elevators in other content this year, other events and other sandbox activities, right? So we've had freight elevators used this year for contested zones. They've never worked reliably. We've had freight elevators used in the Hathor missions. So there's a lot of loot actually at the Hathor sites. I know people don't focus on it, but you can, in theory, throw it all into the freight elevators there and then come back and collect it all. I've never had the freight elevator at the Hathor site even work. I honestly don't know if it's intended to be functioning at those sites, but like, why is it there if not? Anytime I've sent anything down, it just comes right back up. That's a problem. Like, you have something in a game that works consistently and then you see it in another place and it doesn't work. And is that a bug or is it intentional? We have no way of knowing as players. All right. They also used freight elevators, of course, in the Lazarus sites. And I've never personally had those work. I've never been able to get the big fangs off the giant Valacar and send them down the freight elevator and pull them up on the other side. I have once been able to get them down the freight elevator. I've never been able to pull them up on the other side. I've just had to lose the fangs that I put down. So I feel like he glossed over this idea that like there's a problem with freight elevators, but it's mostly the ones at Outposts. It's not the ones at Outposts. It's the ones that are tied to all of the events this year as well. Let me play the second clip and then I'll continue my thought.
Now, at this point, I'm not really telling you anything that most active players don't already know. But it's important to note that these issues have been egregious enough that we'd already started a directed repair initiative months ago. It's just not completed yet.
Okay. So again, he's saying that they have been working on these for months and it's not complete yet. And my point here is, if you really have known freight elevators are not working, and not just at Outposts, but what was not acknowledged here was all the broken freight elevators we've had in contested zones, Hathor, Lazarus, etc. Why would you use them in the Onyx facilities when we don't need to? Like, I still don't understand, why do I complete my mission and then for the first time ever, a box comes up and says, do you want to retrieve your award now? And you say, yes, retrieve. And automatically, without you doing anything, your freight elevator in your hangar comes up. And there's these tiny little drives just laying on the floor. Why doesn't it just work the way script rewards do? Like when you complete, one of Gilly's contracts or whatever, and you get script, it just goes to your home location. And now we're inventing a new way to get rewards in a new event. The concern here is that we're 13 years into development and CIG has no idea, like, how do we reward items for events and missions in game? Like, we can't have it be that every time we have a new event come in, we have some different way that we get our reward. And I totally understand that there's, the game has been focused on some of these bigger technical issues like server meshing and things like that. But nobody's done like some basic game design over the past 13 years to be like, this is how players will get rewards. And I only bring this up because I've lost 11 ASD drives so far in 4.3 because of either bugs with the group system with missions and due to freight elevator issues. So let me close this so we go back to our B-roll, and I'll give some more details on that. Okay, the first problem I had with the Onyx missions was when I was in a group. There was 3 of us. Okay, my org mate, his name's Ubi. He had accepted the last mission. Like, he picked up the mission. It was the last mission in the investigation mission chain. He shared it with 2 of us that were in the group. We went, we completed it. We flew to Bygenius where we happened to be turning it in. And I had the drive that needed to be turned in. So what happened was I turned the drive in and the mission completed. Everything's good. Ubi gets the pop-up saying, hey, your reward is here. The reward for this completing the suite of missions the first time through, like once you complete all of them, I think there's 6 or 7, you get 10 ASD drives. He clicked the button. Nothing really happened. We didn't hear the elevator come up or anything. We were about to leave because we didn't know. This was our first time doing it. Kind of. We did it in PTU once. And he just happened to go over and walk in the elevator and check and saw the 10 drives and the hard drive. So that was a little sketchy, but he got the drives. And that's all fine and good. He got 10 drives. But the problem was when I went to my missions, because now I was going to do my final mission and get my 10 drives, I didn't have that option. It had locked it out for me. So I could only do what they call the updated missions. So basically the way it works is once you complete all the missions, which come up one at a time sequentially, then you are giving 4 repeatable missions that are basically the same. It's 4 of the missions repeated, but they're called updated. The only update is really that they reward 1 drive each now. So my only option was to take that, and now that's what I've been doing. I've been getting 1 drive at a time. So I missed the opportunity to get my 10 drive reward. The problem with that, and the way it worked in PTU was not this way, by the way. In PTU, what happened was whoever got that reward, their missions upgraded to the 4, 1 reward drive missions. But for other people that had the mission shared, they basically had the option to repeat that last mission. It was like they hadn't progressed yet. So then you could do it and get your 10 rewards even with other people helping you. And that's how it should work, because it doesn't make sense that you should be penalized that much for doing the missions in group. I mean, if you had 5 or 6 people doing this, you would each, instead of getting 10, if you just had to share those 10, I don't think that's really the intention. I don't know. I did submit a support ticket on this. I got a response, but it was basically just like, please support this to the issue council. It didn't really say what the intention was or, how it should work or anything like that. So that's a problem. The second one I had was definitely just a freight elevator issue. That was one where I was just doing one of those one-off missions where I get a 1 reward drive, and I put it down. It said confirm. I said yes, and it said, do you want to retrieve your reward? I said yes. The elevator just never came up. I checked all my inventories, no drive anywhere, so it was just gone. So again, this is point 2, and it's a big one, but it's just, if you have known freight elevators are broken, and they've been broken for this whole time, and we just had an event where everyone complained about freight elevators, why are we tying the reward drives, which is just a currency, really? It's just a Wicklow currency. Why are we tying that to the freight elevator? It feels very stupid to get a tiny drive, put it in this giant freight elevator, and send it down. Or what's even more stupid, which is what I usually do because I don't trust that, I take it to the kiosk, the item kiosk. I put it in my local inventory. I go over to the freight elevator. I drag it onto the freight elevator. I bring the freight elevator up, and then I send it back down. All of this to turn in like a tiny little drive. And then to get my reward, the elevator comes back up with a tiny drive on it that I then take, and I take it back and put it in the item kiosk. Why doesn't it just work the way script does? Just put it in my home location, or just put it in the local location of where I'm at when I turn the mission in. But 13 years in, and we're just spitballing ideas for how do you get rewards when you complete a mission. It's a little bit frustrating, and that's why this goes in my bad column. Okay, let's move on, though. I don't want to stay on that. I could talk about freight elevators forever, but let's not do that. Let's move on to number 3. So this is the unfinished puzzles, or things that are missing in these missions that make it feel broken or incomplete. And again, a lot of this is maybe because the contested zone, the cooperative zone content isn't in yet. But as you're doing these missions, you come across things that aren't really explained. Maybe there's markers missing. Like there's one mission where it doesn't, like when I do it, I don't even get an objective that tells me repair pipes. But there's one mission where you're trying to get something from a terminal, and if you just look at the terminal, there's some small type there that says repairs required. It doesn't say what needs to be repaired. It doesn't mention pipes. You just kind of happen to notice there's some broken pipes nearby, and you repair them, and then the screen just happens to update and says copy data, but you really have to be paying attention. So that feels a little incomplete. And there's other things like that you'll see in these facilities where you're like, this must have some purpose. And it's really confusing, honestly, your first time in, because you're not necessarily sure what to do, and you just kind of like just messing with everything. It's not necessarily bad, but it's just very confusing for your first time through. And so this one is, it's on my list of bad things. It's not actually as bad as some of the others, but just something that stands out against all the really otherwise good design we do see in these facilities. Okay, and then moving on, the next item, and this goes back to the narrative that I discussed, and I'm actually going to leave it here. I did have a fifth item, but I kind of covered it. It had to do with the group gameplay and the bugged rewards, so I'm not going to go back to that one. It's sort of tied into the freight elevator, but I don't know if it was really the freight elevator or if it was just a group. So that was sort of a double one there. So really my fifth and final is the broken narrative. And this might be related to cooperative zones not coming in. I'm not sure. There's a lot of rumors out there that these were meant to be instanced and they weren't. So then they did this multi-location workaround. I don't really know. They haven't told us directly that that's the case. At least I haven't heard that. But suffice it to say, the narrative feels really weird on these, because basically you go in, you do mission 1, and it's like you go a little bit into the engineering side, you hit a button, and then you go to the research side, you go a little bit into it, you hit a button, and then he's like, okay, I need you to leave now. So you leave the site, and Arkin comes on, and he's like, okay, we're tracking him down. It looks like he went maybe a little bit further into the engineering side. I need you to go back and go further into the engineering side. So then he's sending you back to like investigate that site a little bit further, but he sends you to a totally different location. And that's the whole chain of investigation missions. And it just feels so weird because you're going in and then coming out and then going back in, but you're going to a different spot. And it feels like what was meant to happen is that you were just supposed to be staying in these facilities and doing these missions one after another. And hopefully like the intention was you're not supposed to leave, because it just feels just very janky. And, I don't know if it's because they wanted to spread things out or, allow you to chop the experience up over multiple play sessions. I'm sure there's good reasons why they did this, but it does make the narrative feel strange and broken, and maybe like it almost feels like they had the narrative down and then they had to change some things about how they were actually implementing the gameplay mechanics, and they didn't have time to go back and change the narrative. Like, to me, it would make even just a few voiceover changes would make a lot more sense if he was like, because the narrative is basically treated as if there's one location, but there's 120. So even if they just said like, hey, we were looking at the data you got us, and we know he went to another site and did some further experimentations at that site. We want you to go over to that site and track this down. Like some very minor changes like that would just make the narrative feel better, but that doesn't exist. So we're left with this very like just chopped up narrative that seems like they had a narrative, they chopped it up and then just put it back together, and the pieces don't really connect to each other. Overall, it's not a huge thing because it is just a narrative, but it's something that stands out as you're playing and completing these missions if you are listening and paying attention to the narrative, which I suggest you do because the narrative is, otherwise really well done, but that does stand out. So those are my critiques of these facilities in this update. I would say of those, there's some minor ones. Probably the big things to me is the first two, just the grind before we're really ready for a grind with other mechanics, and the reliance on, once again, freight elevators, just like why. We got to get them fixed or we got to stop using them up for everything. So let me take a step back now and just talk about overall what I feel like this means and where I land on these facilities in terms of Star Citizen. It's 13 years in development. What should our expectations be? How do we feel about this? Is it a step forward? Is it a step back? And what does that mean for the future? So my feeling on these facility sites and the missions to them overall is this. If these came into any other game that you play as they are now, any other finished game that you're playing, they would be pretty bad, right? If you were playing some other game and you jumped into it and the narrative it was like all choppy, like why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Why are these things in the game that don't seem to do anything? It would be bad, okay? But the thing is, of course, like Star Citizen is not a finished and completed game. It's an alpha, and it's very unpolished. And the truth is, for Star Citizen, these facilities are maybe the best thing that we've seen in combining narrative and location and level design and missions into a sandbox activity like this. So it's a really good step, I feel, for Star Citizen, but it also shows like how much work is left to be done to get on par with, being like a 1.0 stage. There's still so far to go to get this to feel like something that would feel good in a normal game, where you could like recommend it to somebody and they could go in and play it and like they would feel like it's a good experience. Like right now, I feel like if you took someone that wasn't a Star Citizen player and you were like, hey, jump in and check out these events, they would be like, this feels really broken and terrible, and there's some cool things, but like there's so much wrong. So that's sort of the juxtaposition of what this is right now, because it's in the middle of alpha. I mean, are we in the middle of alpha? It feels like we're in still early to middle alpha, right? But it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a big step actually in the right direction. I think it's a promising indication of like what we might get when we have more developers working on Star Citizen and less focus on Squadron 42. The other way to say this is hopefully everything in Squadron 42 feels a lot better than this. Like if you were to play Squadron 42 next year and the missions were like this, it would not be good, right? It would not be good. So we need to raise the bar on the Star Citizen side. But, it just shows like there's a lot, as good as they are, there's a lot that we need to get better at and do better. And mostly, like the big concern, like they got to be able to do this stuff more quickly, right? Because one of the big issues right now is it feels like the teams working on Star Citizen, they can do one thing at a time. So if they're making something like Onyx, it means that Siege of Orison is not getting fixed. Contested zones are not getting fixed. Hathor is not getting fixed. Lazarus is not getting fixed. None of these things either exist right now, like Siege of Orison does not exist any longer, and it was really cool. It's sad that that doesn't exist. So they don't exist or they don't work reliably at all. But we keep pushing the next thing out. We still don't have distribution centers finished. Like, remember how cool distribution centers were supposed to be? That was supposed to be like our first raid content. And instead we're getting, we're sort of getting that here in the Onyx facilities. So these Onyx facilities, they're promising, they show potential, but will they get fixed? Or will we just be moving on to the next thing that's coming after this? And then it just gets abandoned like everything else before. And the more we keep adding in without truly fixing, we're just creating this giant backlog of stuff behind us that just is in game and doesn't work. And how long are we going to do that, right? When do we get the ability to get new content while we're fixing old content? Is that possible? Because it doesn't seem possible right now. And that's a bit troubling, right? So and this is kind of where this is leading to. I think the facilities are a good step, but the further we get into this project, and the more we accomplish in terms of knocking out the big technical stuff like server meshing, it feels like it's exposing how poorly the underlying foundations of everything else is. We've had all this placeholder stuff for so long. The problems with freight elevators are a good example. They said they've known for a long time. Or the inventory issues. Or how do we distribute rewards? We're 13 years in, and while we've been working on these big things, it seems like no work was being done in thinking and designing all these other systems. So we've just had all these placeholders. And it's like 13 years in, and we're just now starting to think about and figure out things that you would typically do in the first 2 to 5 years of development. Like, you usually are not figuring out your inventory system 13 years into development. You're usually not in a flight game figuring out your flight model 13 years into development. Usually 13 years into your development, you're not figuring out, how do I reward an item to the player? So it feels like we don't have any definitive direction on where we're going. And that causes a little bit of worry for me that we've built so much on such a weak foundation. And what does that mean? Now we almost have to surgically go into that foundation and carefully take things out and put new things in and update it. And that's not easy because you have all this stuff on top of it now. And you have things like server meshing that now everything has to be gone in and figured out how to work with server meshing. But then we're going to dynamic server meshing. What is that going to mean? And how long is it going to take to get some of these just foundational principles of how the game works in? And are we going to get there? So I think Jared kind of sums up actually a lot about how I feel. I'm going to go back and share another clip from Jared from his IC. And I think he nailed it here.
It's been a sometimes frustrating process for everyone on both sides of the project. But at the same time, we're super proud of the content and cadence we've achieved this year, and of the strides all of our teams are making to make this the most compelling year of Star Citizen gameplay yet. For every single step backwards, I truly believe we're taking multiple strides forward, and the overall improvements to the experience along the way are what keep many of us motivated to continue going month after month. And with this new Onyx Facilities content drop being spread out over multiple releases, we're going to continue taking the time to improve existing experiences along the way.
Okay, so yeah, I think he said it well. Frustration on both sides, and none of this is a critique or I'm meant to be mean to CIG or their developers. Game development is really hard. I'm frustrated sometimes. I'm sure you guys are frustrated sometimes. They are also frustrated sometimes with themselves, and that's okay. And it's good for them to share that and let us know about it. And as he says, they want to, they want to do better. They want to fix things. But that's kind of where I'm at with this whole year of playability. I feel like we've had some really cool experiences that I've enjoyed, but they have been frustrating at times, and they've scared me a little bit in exposing how poor some of the underlying systems are functioning, like the freight elevators. And it scares me a little bit about how little seems actually planned out in terms of game design. What have game designers been doing for 13 years? I wish there was more of a solid plan of this is where we're going, and this is what we're doing, and this is how we're going to get there. And this is episode 2 of this podcast. Episode 1, I talked about the inventory system and the update they gave of like, here's our ideals for a new inventory system. And what I raised there was like, they're just spitballing. They're just saying like, this is just a concept. And it might be 2 years before we get it. And that's kind of similar to where I'm at with, these facilities and what it means. It's just like, when you hear this, you're like, if you were not paying attention to Star Citizen and you heard that, you'd be like, oh, this project must be like in its first year or 2 of development. But we're 13 years in, and like, oh my gosh, we're just starting to think about ideas and concepts for inventory. We're just starting to think about how do we give players rewards for completing events and missions. So yeah, like Jared's right. It's frustration. It's like a combination of, hey, this is really cool, but oh my gosh, there's so far to go. Why is there so far to go? What have we been doing with our time? Yeah, and so the only thing we can do is just, continue to follow and kind of push them to get better at doing, the things that they're working on, but more importantly, get better at communicating to us, what's going on. And that's, I guess if I had a 5th critique, it wouldn't really be on the Onyx, or 5th or 6th, however you want to number it, on the Onyx. But in this year of playability, in this year where Jared is doing less ISCs and less Star Citizens Live, with the excuse that, because there's less features out there, why aren't we doing more ISCs or SCLs on the development side and just being like, hey, here's what's going on, here's our plans, here's where we're at, this is how we're going to fix it. Because this last ISC that Jared gave, I really enjoyed his frank talk on the freight elevators, even though I think he glossed over, like I said, the problems with freight elevators in events and sandbox activities this year. But it was really great to hear him just say yeah, these things just, weren't working as we thought they would. We underestimated how well they would work. That's our bad. And here's what we're going to try to do. So we need to get more of bring Rich in. He did mention Benoit's going to be in soon. Bring Chris in, bring the developers in and just give us updates on what's happening in development. We don't need to focus on features so much, but just what are the plans and where are the developers right now? Are they mostly on Squadron 42, which would be understandable? Is that an explanation for, why things are taking so long? But what's the plan to get everyone on Star Citizen, and when can we really start seeing some of these very basic things start to get better and work? So those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know, what do you think of the Onyx facilities? Are you enjoying them? How have you found the grind for ASD branded gear if you're going for it? Do you think the RNG numbers are too low? Are you happy with them? Have you found the full suit? What do you think of the reward system, the way you get rewards? Have you had problems with the freight elevators like I have, or is it working for you? And more importantly, I think what do you think of these facilities overall in 4.3 for how they fit into Star Citizen's development? Do you think they're good and you're happy with how they've turned out? Do you think there's some concerns with them? And where's the balance at? Where do you come out in the balance, and what are you looking forward to next? Jared did mention 4.3 is going to have additional content releases as we move forward. I'm anticipating we'll get that 3rd wing and we'll get cooperative zones. There's some rumors we might get some kind of boss fight either in these or in some other location. What are you looking forward to as this sort of 4.3 continues with sub patches over the next couple months? I'm going to drop it there and just ask, if you can, hit the follow button. Be sure to share and like. This is a new channel. This is my 2nd podcast episode. It helps immensely. Watching, first of all, is great. Thank you so much if you watched. And if I could ask just a little bit extra, if you can hit that follow, like, share, etc., it goes a long way. I appreciate it and hope to see you soon in the next one. Otherwise, I hope to see you streaming on Twitch or in another video on YouTube soon.